Battle of the Sith Lords was the name of the Darth Maul game that ended up joining the list of cancelled Star Wars games we never got. The footage you're seeing here was created as a prototype of the game, developed while Redfly Studio, the game devs behind the Darth Maul game, were in talks with LucasArts to get it developed. And this video is sponsored by Star Wars Card Trader. If you're a Star Wars fan, you should check it out. I'll talk more about that soon. The Darth Maul game had working gameplay mechanics, combat of Maul fighting Mandalorians, a probe droid, force powers, a built space station interior with AI, and lots more unreleased working gameplay footage, including Darth Maul's blood-fin speeder bike, which I don't think is in any other game I've ever seen. So why did it get cancelled? What happened? How can a game with already working mechanics and gameplay like this be cancelled? Hey everyone, it's Andrew, and today I'm going to discuss everything we know about this Darth Maul game, as well as the possibility of it being released in the future, which the developers are still hopeful for. This is basically the documentary of the cancelled Star Wars Darth Maul game, and none of this is recent news, but I've never talked about it before on the channel, so thought I'd do that today. So here we go. This is the tale of the Darth Maul game we all wanted. Battle of the Sith Lords was supposed to tell the tale of a young Darth Maul, a coming-of-age story, where Maul was forced to join the Sith because of his unique connection to the Force. We wanted people to see him as a kid kidnapped by Emperor Palpatine and tortured, physically, mentally, and emotionally, becoming this powerful Sith Lord. These are the words of a developer from Redfly Studio. You got angry, you got frustrated, and you made the same mistakes he did. No one has ever seen Sith training up close. No one has ever seen how to construct a Sith from kid to adult. We've only seen the 5-second turn. Anakin Skywalker cries a little bit, then he's evil. By the sounds of it, this game wanted to delve deep into the Sith and show a side of Star Wars we've never really seen before, a darker side of Sith training, and tell a story from the villain's perspective. It also sounds as if the developers wanted you to empathize with Darth Maul and show how he was twisted against his will to become the evil we see in The Phantom Menace. They wanted to tell the story of how Palpatine's manipulation created a monster who eventually turned on the Sith Lord. You'd eventually fight Palpatine in the game, and already I think you can see a comparison between this game's story and what was explored in the Clone Wars TV show, which is part of where conflict arose and why this game was cancelled. More on that soon. Redfly Studio had a dream. For the most part, they were a small, unknown studio based out of Austin, Texas, wanting to make a big impact with their Star Wars idea. The studio seems to have been founded in 2006 and started working with LucasArts in 2010, and were responsible for the Force Unleashed 2 port onto the Nintendo Wii. So they had some experience working with the Star Wars license, and even making this wasn't a smooth process for Redfly. According to Dan Borth, the CEO of Redfly, they built a demo in 2 weeks with little assistance from LucasArts. With a team of around 50 people, Redfly built the Wii version of the Force Unleashed 2 in less than 9 months. The developers stated they had very little assistance from LucasArts, who weren't providing art assets for the game fast enough, so we built almost everything from scratch, says Borth. But the studio performed well, and the game was a success, gaining a Metacritic score of 71, scoring higher than every other platform release of The Force Unleashed 2, which is impressive. So obviously the studio was showing their potential. Now you'd have to think that for a small dev studio like Redfly, working with a publisher like LucasArts was a big break. Going from working on some of their previous games like Mushroom Men, Food Network, and a Ghostbusters port for PS2, to working on Star Wars was a huge step up. Star Wars is, after all, one of the biggest franchises in the world, and I think this is part of what gave Redfly high hopes, even though they were being branded as the Nintendo Wii guys by LucasArts. However, things started to change when Nintendo and LucasArts began talks of creating a new game for the Wii or Wii U, soon to be released. Paul Megan, LucasArts president, who now works for Epic Games, contacted Borth about creating a Darth Maul game. I got a call from Paul, and he asked me if I'd be interested in making a Darth Maul game, and I was like, yes, of course. What an opportunity. So a contract was signed, and Redfly began work on ideas, demos, and mechanics. It wasn't really a game contract, it was more like a work for hire month-to-month thing. We started to flesh out our ideas and content and stuff like that. I think after about 3 or 4 months we entered into the game contract contract. It got intimate pretty quick. This was in October of 2010. But as Redfly worked on the initial stages of the game, Lucasfilm had plans to include Darth Maul in the Clone Wars animated TV show, which Redfly weren't told about. They eventually only received small pieces of information, said a Redfly developer. We were told Maul survived his encounter with Obi-Wan Kenobi in The Phantom Menace. We fashioned robotic legs on Maul after being told he had them. Then we were told he had a brother named Savage Opress. He was supposedly green. Again, we were not told of the Clone Wars storyline at this time. But it seemed to Redfly that the direction of the game was shifting. No longer were they telling Maul's origin story, but instead their game would be an extension of the Clone Wars show. So that's the first change of direction and development for the game, but it gets better, just you wait. At this point, LucasArts' negotiations with Nintendo to make the game a Wii exclusive game had also broken down. Nintendo weren't meeting the financial demands of the project, they didn't want to put enough money into the project, so LucasArts shifted development to the PS3, Xbox 360, PC, and Wii U, which could be seen as a good thing, as now the game would have a wider release. It was tough because we didn't have any information. They didn't want to share it, they didn't want to leak any Clone Wars stuff. We were like, good God, are we doing this or not? That's next on the tale of the cancelled Darth Maul game. Stay tuned. Now, like I said before, today's video is sponsored by Star Wars Card Trader, the mobile app which allows you to collect digital Topps Star Wars trading cards, including some of the original cards released in 1977, and you can even get Jedi Fallen Order cards. I didn't know these were a thing until I opened a pack and there was one in it. I was like, oh wow, it's Cal from Jedi Fallen Order. What I like about this app is how many different characters you can collect from both new and old Star Wars titles. I'm still looking for a Darth Maul card at the moment. Might have to trade someone for it, which is something you can do in the app. You can trade cards, it's a trading card app. And there's stuff like daily rewards and missions where you can unlock avatars for your profile and get extra bonuses. Go check it out. The app is free and there's a link to it in the description. And you can find me on there as Stay Bombastic. Come follow me and trade me your Darth Maul cards. I need a Darth Maul. And we're back with the cancelled Darth Maul game. Now, almost all Redfly had was the potential name of the game, Battle of the Sith Lords. So they built their idea around this. Redfly came up with the idea of making the game action stealth based, similar to Batman Arkham Asylum, which was really popular at the time. It was kind of a groundbreaking game back in the early 2010s. And Redfly had actually previously built a Wii version of Arkham Asylum, which was never released, along with so many of their other games, which is disappointing. They wanted Maul to be insanely more powerful than any other enemies in the game, but if he took a few hits, he'd get taken down. That type of game. They used the term glass cannon. Redfly spent months developing the prototypes for the Darth Maul game. The art direction was coming together, along with some of the game's core mechanics. Around this time, a few Redfly devs flew out to LucasArts to show off their prototype, meeting with LucasArts creative director Clint Hocking and designer Kent Hudson. They discussed ways of making gameplay compelling. We said Darth Maul's connection to the Force was through generating fear. They wanted gameplay to be about building fear in enemies, then execute stealth kills and manipulate the environment. It was exciting, cool stuff. On another trip to LucasArts, Redfly learned more about Darth Maul's involvement in the Clone Wars animation. We were told that after The Phantom Menace, Maul ended up in a trash compactor, went crazy, and assembled a spider body for himself out of junk. And at this point, once again, the devs started to freak out that they had to change Maul once again and give him spider legs. But this didn't stick. Eventually, Maul got the robotic legs we see later in the Clone Wars, so they didn't have to change too much of their designs. But this is where the direction of the project started to become very confusing for Redfly. They didn't know if they should start focusing more on the Clone Wars crossover or their original story. LucasArts said there's a lot of crosstalk going on, misinformation, let's actually sit down and have you guys talk to George. And instead of providing some clarity, this is where things began to really become muddled. Redfly met with LucasArts Paul Megan and creative director Frederick Marcus and the Lucasfilm president president, Micheline Chow. Redfly outlined the design and scope of their Maul game, but the Lucas representatives stopped them short, saying it lacked cohesion, but admitting there was something special about the game. It just wasn't quite there yet. And so, for the next week, Redfly devs worked at LucasArts to find the game's vision and make both sides happy. And then they were to meet with the maker himself, George Lucas. But first, we're briefed on how to speak to him. Redfly were told to never say no to George, or to never say, yeah, that'll be easy. They were told to not mention Starkiller from The Force Unleashed, not sure if he doesn't like Starkiller or something like that. And the most important rule, never, ever tell George how the Force works. And apparently when arriving to the meeting a little early, the Redfly representatives were met with LucasArts employees rushing Force Unleashed art and toys out of the meeting room and replacing them with other Star Wars collectibles so that George wouldn't see the Force Unleashed stuff. In particular, they placed 2 statues, one of Darth Maul and one of Darth Talon, on the table. Darth Talon is a Legends comic book character who existed over 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, long after Maul's time. So, the big moment, George Lucas enters the room and starts listening to Redfly's pitch. But before they could finish their spiel, Lucas cut them off, stood up, walked over to the statues, rotated them to be facing the same direction, pushed them together, and said, they're friends. He wanted these characters to be friends and to play off each other, Maul and Talon. He talked about the show Burn Notice as a reference point. He likened Darth Maul to Sonny from The Godfather and likened Darth Talon to Lauren Bacall. What is going on? So the problem with this is that Darth Maul and Darth Talon are separated by over 170 years in the Star Wars timeline. But when the devs brought this up to George, he said the idea could still work and that instead of it being the real Darth Maul, it could be his descendant or even a clone of Maul, which is starting to sound more like the already made Force Unleashed games than a Darth Maul game. Redfly said George was keen on the idea of having the player dictate the narrative of the game. He wanted the kind of experience where the player could tell the game what type of story they wanted. It wasn't so much a choose your own adventure, it was more of a player being able to act as director, letting the game still respond and react to the player's wishes and surprising the player with new experiences that maybe they didn't expect. Clearly, this was not the forward stealth game for Darth Maul anymore. Redfly couldn't have left the meeting more confused. In the days following, they stayed at LucasArts and collaborated to figure out how to get this new idea to work with what they'd already built. But you'd have to feel their spirits were kind of shattered. The new story was to have Darth Maul and Darth Talon fight Darth Krayt and his Sith army, hence the title Battle of the Sith Lords. And Darth Krayt was once the Padawan of Ki-Adi-Mundi for a little background knowledge. If we were going that route, the heir of Maul had to be a secret. He could be trained by the ghost of Maul himself in the ways of the Sith and wait until it was time to strike back at the Sith for polluting the rule of 2, one master, one apprentice. We wanted to go with that. It was up to Maul's heir to return the Sith to the balance of 2, and of course have Talon be focused into it. We felt this was the best story we could make out of the ingredients we were given, and we never got to hear if Lucas liked this story or the direction we were going. And so, upon returning to Redfly Studio, the dev team worked on prototypes for the new direction of the game. We had this Arkham mechanic with lightsabers, and he wanted us to come up with a mechanic that would allow the player to deflect incoming laser fire, which is not that difficult, but at the same time we had to direct it back and control it while not breaking combat or using time dilation. That was quite a feat. We almost cracked it, and we came up with something that was kind of a hybrid and almost workable, but we didn't really feel like deflection was a Maul trait. Maul is just about attack, 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 attack. We had heads flying everywhere, which is something I think would have been great about this game. But there was a problem. LucasArts refused to sign off on anything large scale that would get the game into a full development cycle. The game still had no clear direction, and the now 80 or so staff members of Redfly were making content they weren't guaranteed would have a future. There was lots of concept art developed which showed the idea of incorporating the Black Sun criminal syndicate into the story. Enemies and characters were designed, but none of it got anywhere. Multiple Sith Lords were also designed, including Darth Anexor, Darth Krone, among others. Locations were created, some looking similar to Tatooine's Mos Espa spaceport. This here is an ocean city pulled along the water by giant eels. There were multiple ideas being developed by Redfly, but they were still only ideas. We had a bunch of prototypes for different storytelling techniques whereby you could start nudging the scene toward a Talon approach or a Darth Maul approach. We had characters that could take any number of weird situational inputs and could query the world for things, and then make a response that seemed to make sense. But I think there were still people that were in love with the idea of Darth Maul using fear as his route to the Force. It started shooting out in too many different directions at once, unfortunately, and we had a lot of people. Sounds like a lot of miscommunication. And LucasArts was aware of this. They were aware of the project's lack of direction. So they flew more Redfly developers to LucasArts to continue working on the game and its concepts. We learned a lot, did some good work, went back to Austin, but weren't really able to execute on it. And then there were talks of Redfly even being purchased by LucasArts as a subsidiary studio to have a closer relationship with the Star Wars brand and assets. But this would have also assisted with their financial future. But then suddenly everything changed. We didn't hear from them for 2 weeks. 2.5 weeks, no word, nothing. And when I say no word, I mean nothing. We tried to contact them over and over again. We know how slow they move, and we've seen them do this before. We were at least hopeful, but still no word came. We knew what was going on. They just couldn't tell us. But we didn't know the extent of what was going on. We thought, okay, they're not going to buy us, fine. We didn't know the game would get cancelled. And then on June 24, 2011, after months of production on the game, Redfly received an email. The subject line, Maul Termination Letter. This was the end. Not only of the Maul game, but also potentially the end of Redfly Studio. All their funding was coming from LucasArts. The studio was relying on this one project to be their make or break. And it just broke. Dan Borth commented, "Despite the project being cancelled, LucasArts treated us very well afterwards. While it was a struggle, they gave us the ability to continue operating. But the company downsized, significantly losing 70% of its workforce. So, how can a game that had so much time and development put into it, trips to Lucasfilm and meeting with George Lucas himself, lead to cancellation? Well, a lot of people say none of it had to do with unsuccessful prototypes, or even the game's lack of direction. Instead, it was due to George Lucas's decision to sell Star Wars to Disney. And this doesn't make it Disney's fault. The sale of Lucasfilm to Disney meant a gigantic restructure and change of direction in the company. And they had to figure out the large-scale future direction of where they wanted to take the Star Wars brand. And this meant that anything currently in development had to be put on hold because it might conflict with their future ideas. Long-term plans had to be created before Disney could start releasing any new Star Wars titles. And that's what we're seeing now with the sequel trilogy films, Rogue One, Solo, Mandalorian, Clone Wars 7, Fallen Order, Battlefront 2, Galaxy's Edge, and all future Star Wars titles. That's the Disney effect. But sadly for us, and for Redfly, this meant the cancellation of the Darth Maul game we all dreamt of. An interesting comment was made by Dan Borth. A lot of good people on both sides really put their hearts into it. We certainly wish things would have gone differently. And since the cancellation, Redfly hasn't really done all that much. However, a few years ago, there were some talks of reviving the game's development, when Dan Borth, Redfly's CEO, held an Ask Me Anything on Reddit. This was back in October 2015, when Borth said, "We're currently working on resurrecting it, and I'm here to answer questions." But before that, in September 2015, he spoke to Game Informer's Andrew Reiner about the project. He talked about how when developing Maul, Redfly built a combat system, AI, and a bunch of other stuff they didn't want to go to waste when the game got cancelled. So they kept building on them after cancellation. And some of these systems went into Dawn of Fire, another Redfly game that never made it. Borth said, "In the back of our minds, we always had a little candle on for Maul. We knew we probably would never get to make the game again, but this little candle always was back there. And every once in a while, in our off time, we'd go back to the game because it's fun and we have a passion for it." Borth then goes on to talk about pitching the idea to EA and Disney, but we knew it was dead. And every time I'd say, "Hey, maybe I'll take this to EA, or maybe we'll talk to Disney if the opportunity presents itself," we mentioned it to a few people over at EA, but it never went anywhere. As part of developing newer games, Borth talked about Redfly constantly updating their pre-built systems and assets, and the Darth Maul project would come along with this. According to Borth, the Darth Maul game now exists in Unreal Engine 4, which is actually the same game engine used to build Jedi Fallen Order. Can you imagine the Darth Maul game looking like this? I so badly want to see this. And Borth said there was no one actually assigned to working on the project at the time of the interview. It was more just something a few devs would work on in their spare time. The only time we ever really talked to anyone at EA was back before the next-gen consoles were going to hit, and their concern was, oh, this looks cool, but it's not next-gen. We, since that point, have been polishing things up to be next-gen, and really haven't talked to anyone about it since. In the Reddit AMA, Borth talks about approaching EA with a demo of the game that will impress them, and possibly want to consider options for resurrecting the Maul game's development. In amongst these comments, there was also talk of an Easter egg in which Darth Maul is able to kill Jar Jar over and over again, and if this is a part of any game, I will definitely be buying it. That is a fantastic game mechanic. The AMA also revealed more specific details about the game's potential story and gameplay mechanics. Apparently, the story was also becoming similar to what's seen in the Clone Wars, and at one point, Maul was being paired with Savage Opress. This definitely makes more sense than Darth Talon. But the game was also taking more notes out of the Arkham series, with Maul not always using his lightsaber, and instead using the environment around him to take down enemies. A heavy emphasis on aggressive stealth. Just imagine this game, but you're playing as Darth Maul in the Star Wars universe. The time span of the game was to go from a young Maul, aged 9 or 11, to right before the Phantom Menace, to show the torment Palpatine put him through to become a Sith Lord. The probe droid also seemed to form a big part of the stealth gameplay. It was puzzle driven, shut this down, hack this computer, open this door, gather info, and you'd be using the probe droid to do all that. Also, Darth Maul's Bloodfin speeder bike was a part of the game, and Borth stated that it's playable in Unreal Engine 4, although there's no footage of this unfortunately, but I feel like we need to see this. That would be incredible. Speeding through Maul on Tatooine through the canyons on his speeder bike, yes please. Decapitation and dismemberment were also going to be a part of the game, as you see in this clip here. This makes total sense for Maul's violent nature and really fits the character. And also the final level of the game would have Maul fight against Darth Sidious. With Maul stranded in the Outer Rim, Sidious comes to tell him he was never his first choice as a student. The two fight, with Sidious winning easily. Maul thinks he's going to die, but Sidious was using a training saber to fool Maul into thinking he was going to die. And that was Maul's final test, and after that, Maul was a Sith Lord. So after the Reddit AMA, which made the front page of Reddit and was trending all over the internet, Borth's revival of the Darth Maul game seemed real. Fans all over the world had created enough noise that both Disney and EA heard, but this didn't mean it was good news for Redfly. Andrew Reiner from Game Informer once again spoke to Borth following the AMA. During the interview, Borth mentioned his brief interactions with EA and Disney. Yes, I think EA and Lucasfilm aren't interested in Darth Maul. They're moving forward, not backwards. More power to them. I had a conversation with Lucasfilm. It was basically the same response. Not interested. And it seems the added attention from Reddit was annoying them. So that's about it for the game. Since then, Redfly and Dan Borth haven't really been heard from. Dawn of Fire, the game Redfly were building with Maul's game mechanics, is still yet to be released. At the moment, there's only 3 minutes of gameplay published to Redfly's YouTube channel, with no combat or gameplay included. It's just a character walking through the map. Redfly's last game was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Portal Power, a mobile game released back in 2016. Redfly's website either goes to this Reasons to Visit Okinawa page or a download page for the Nox emulator, so I'm not sure the company even owns the domain name anymore. And Dan Borth hasn't been heard from. I searched the internet, his Twitter account hasn't been active since 2015, Redfly's last post was in early 2016. In 2019, Borth received a production credit for working on American Ninja Warrior Challenge, a game for the Nintendo Switch, but this doesn't seem to have anything to do with Redfly Studio. So where is he now? Well, I did find this. This is Dan Borth. a brown belt jiu-jitsu coach at Austin Jiu-Jitsu. Not sure if this is a full-time job or just something Borth does after work, but based on the lack of information online about still being involved in game development, it's very possible Borth has moved away from game development altogether, which is totally fine, and he's made a life choice to move on to another venture and something else he's interested in. All power to him. He tried for so long to get this game made, didn't happen. And Redfly Studio has also disappeared, which unfortunately means that this Darth Maul game started way back in 2010 is probably never going to see the light of day. But somewhere, probably in Austin, Texas, sitting on someone's desk, in someone's drawer, installed in someone's computer, is a hard drive containing files to a playable Darth Maul game. We're just never going to see it. A game we're never going to play. A game that had so much promise, but was being made at the wrong time. If development had started a couple years earlier, this thing might have seen the light of day before the Disney merger. And who knows if it was going to even be good or not. But any Darth Maul game, I feel, is still better than no Darth Maul game, right? I think it's unlikely that this particular Darth Maul game will ever be made, just because EA is quite exclusive with only using EA Studios for development, and at the moment they have an exclusive license to the Star Wars license, apart from the Lego license. We've seen what DICE have done with Battlefront and Respawn with Jedi Fallen Order, but I don't think Darth Maul is completely off the table for future titles. It's obvious Disney knows the value of Darth Maul, continuing his development in the Clone Wars, in Solo a Star Wars story, and we do know EA Studios are already busy at work on new Star Wars titles, releasing in the next few years. So who knows what the future of Darth Maul gaming holds. Let's just hope it involves this Zabrak from Dathomir in some way. So do you think we'll ever get this Darth Maul game or any Darth Maul game? What do you think of the cancellation? Let me know in the comments. And go watch my video about all the details of future EA Star Wars games releasing in the next few years. There's some exciting stuff going on, that's for sure. And come over to my Twitter, Instagram, and Discord to tell me your thoughts about what happened to this Darth Maul game. Fingers crossed one day we'll get a game about this guy. Thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.
Stay bombastic.